Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The front door was unlocked. That was the first thing I noticed when I got home that Tuesday evening. Damon always locked the door. Always. Even if he was inside, he still checked it twice before bed, like the deadbolt held the whole world together. So when I turned the knob and it opened without resistance, something cold settled under my ribs. I stepped inside and stopped. The living room was empty. Not messy, not rearranged, empty. The sofa was gone. The coffee table was gone. The floor lamp, the bookshelf I had refinished by hand, the rug my mother gave us as a wedding gift, all gone. My bag slipped from my shoulder and hit the hardwood with a sound that echoed through the whole house. I walked through the room slowly, the way people move through hospitals after bad news, afraid the next corner will make things worse. It did. The dining table was gone. Half the kitchen cabinets were bare. He had taken dishes, pots, utensils, even the spice rack. In the primary bedroom, the bed frame and mattress were gone, along with the nightstands and the dresser from his side. My jewelry box had vanished with the rest of the bedroom furniture, though my clothes were still hanging in the closet, untouched, as if he had left them there out of courtesy. That was what made it cruel. He had not taken everything. He had taken what he valued and left what he did not. On the kitchen counter, taped neatly to the granite, was a yellow note in his handwriting. It said, "The lawyer will be in touch. 8 years of marriage." 5 words. I read the note 3 times, folded it once, and slid it into my coat pocket. I still did not cry. I would not let that hollow house hear me break. I went to the garage because some part of me needed to see what he had decided mattered there too. Damon had taken his golf clubs, his tools, his workbench, his portable speakers, even the expensive vice he never used. What remained were outlines on the wall and dust where his things had been. In the far corner, under a film of gray dirt, sat one thing he had left behind: my grandfather Henry's red metal toolbox. The paint was faded, the corners dented, and one clasp never closed right. Damon had called it junk every year of our marriage. He said it made the garage look like a salvage yard. I had kept saying no. I crouched beside the toolbox and put my hand on the lid. The metal was cool beneath my palm, and for a second I was not in that empty garage anymore. I was in my grandfather's workshop in Durham, North Carolina, sitting on a stool with my legs too short to touch the floor while he planed a piece of oak. He smelled like peppermint, cedar dust, and machine oil. When I was little, he used to tell me that the world overlooked the best things because most people only knew how to value shine. He loved old tools, old clocks, old wood, old stories. He loved anything made by patient hands. Once, when I was 12, I watched him fuss with the bottom panel of that toolbox. He winked and said, "A good box can hold more than people think, baby girl." I had laughed and forgotten it. Kneeling there years later, I remembered the line but not yet what it meant. 3 weeks earlier, things had not been good, but they had still looked like a marriage from the outside. That was part of what made the betrayal so ugly. Damon and I had not always been broken. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner when we were both still building our lives. He was ambitious and polished, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make people think he belonged at the center of it. I was quieter, still finishing design school, still learning how to take up space without apologizing for it. In those early years, he seemed proud of me. He framed my first published design spread. He told people I could see rooms the way musicians hear songs. We bought our routines the way most couples do, 1 year at a time. Sunday groceries, late dinners, paint samples spread across the table, plans for a future we thought would keep widening. The cooling happened slowly enough that I kept mistaking it for stress. Damon's real estate business had grown, and he wore busyness like a medal. He came home later. He answered messages through dinner. He started taking calls on the back porch instead of in the kitchen. He stopped asking how my day went and stopped using my name as often when he spoke to me, which sounds small until it happens for months, and you realize you are disappearing inside your own house. I made excuses for him, because that is what love does when it does not want to look at the truth. I told myself he was tired. I told myself business was hard. I told myself marriage went through seasons. What I did not tell myself was the thing I already knew, that he had become careful in the way people become careful when there is something to hide. The first crack came from a paper receipt that fell from his jacket pocket while I was hanging it up. It was from the Monarch Hotel. Tuesday night. Room service for 2. Champagne. Chocolate-covered strawberries. That was the same Tuesday Damon told me he had been stuck at a late property showing. I stood in our bedroom holding that receipt and felt the world shift under me. Not with a dramatic collapse, but with the slow sound of ice splitting on a frozen lake. I did not confront him then. Damon was too good a liar for a half-formed accusation. He could look straight at me and deny rain while we were both standing in it. So I put the receipt in my dresser, under a stack of scarves, and I started paying attention. 2 Saturdays later, he left his tablet on the kitchen counter while he rushed out for what he called a broker luncheon. It was unlocked. I did not even have to guess the code. I opened his messages and found 2 years of texts with a woman named Betrayal Lawson, the receptionist at his brokerage. The first few messages were harmless. Scheduling, client callbacks, office jokes. Then the tone changed. Pet names, late-night photos, hotel reservations, weekend plans. What hurt was not only that he had been sleeping with her. It was the intimacy of it. He asked how she slept. He sent her good morning messages. He noticed when she changed her hair. He told her things he no longer said to me. And the ugliest part was what they said about me. Betrayal asked once if I suspected anything. Damon answered, "She is too busy with her little decorating projects to notice what I do." I kept reading because pain sometimes dares you to go deeper, just to prove to yourself you are not imagining it. I found messages where Betrayal joked that I must be good for overhead since somebody has to keep the lights on while you play king. I found Damon replying with a laughing emoji and, "She handles the groceries, utilities, and most of the house stuff. It keeps me free." He had used my labor and my money to help fund the life he was building around another woman. The hotel charges had been hidden as client entertainment. Dinners had been paid through his business card. I had been stretching my design income to cover ordinary life while he spent generously on secrecy, then came home and acted inconvenienced by me. That was when the betrayal stopped being just about sex. It became something meaner. He had not only cheated on me, he had made me carry part of the cost. I remember going into the bathroom after that and washing my face with cold water because I needed something physical, something undeniable. I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. My face looked familiar and unfamiliar at once. My skin, my cheekbones, the small scar on my chin from a bicycle accident when I was 9. I was still me. That was what shocked me. I had spent so long absorbing Damon's neglect that I had started to experience myself through absence, through what was not said, through what was not noticed. Standing there, I heard my grandfather's voice as clearly as if he were beside me. "Do not let anybody train you to believe you are ordinary." By the time Damon came home, whistling and smelling like cologne he had no reason to be wearing at noon, something inside me had gone still. I was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in. The tablet was beside my hand. He looked at it first, then at me, and I watched the realization move across his face in stages. "Sit down," I said. My voice was calm enough to frighten him. He sat, but not across from me. He chose the far end of the table, as if distance might help. I told him I had seen the messages. I told him I knew about Betrayal. He tried denial first, because that was his instinct. He said I was misunderstanding things. He said work friendships could look different in text. He said I was being emotional. Then I mentioned the hotel receipts, the photographs, the 2 years of lies. His shoulders dropped. He rubbed his hands together and stopped pretending. "Yes," he said finally. "It happened. Not I am sorry. Not I hurt you. It happened, like the affair was weather and he had merely been standing in it." Then he went where weak people always go when they want to make their selfishness sound complicated. He said we had not been right for a long time. He said we had drifted. He said I was always working, always wrapped up in my design business. I asked him when he had tried to talk to me about any of that. He opened his mouth and then closed it because we both knew the answer was never. He had not reached for me. He had reached around me. Then he said the sentence that ended whatever tenderness I still had left. "Maybe if you had put as much effort into this marriage as you put into making rooms pretty for strangers, we would not be here." I did not throw anything. I did not scream. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw how small he was under all that confidence. "I want a divorce," I said. He laughed once, sharp and irritated, and told me not to be dramatic. I repeated it. He asked if I understood what divorce would cost. I told him I understood what staying would cost. Then I got up, took my phone into the guest room, and called my best friend Rochelle. She answered on the second ring. I said, he admitted it. 2 years. Rochelle did not waste a single second on shock. She said, "I am coming over, and tomorrow you are calling Vanessa Holloway. Vanessa was the attorney Rochelle's cousin had used in her own custody matter. She does not get rattled, Rochelle told me. That is the one you need. Vanessa Holloway met with me that Monday morning in an office that was neat without being cold. I liked her immediately because she did not offer false comfort. She asked for screenshots, timelines, receipts, bank access, tax returns, brokerage statements, title records, and every ugly detail I wished I could forget. She also told me the truth about the house before Damon had the chance to use it as a weapon. He had bought it 2 years before we married with a down payment from his late mother's estate. The deed and mortgage were in his name alone. Under state law, that gave him a strong separate property argument, no matter how much I had contributed to the life inside those walls. That does not mean he walks away clean, Vanessa said. But it does mean we need facts, not outrage. Outrage does not survive cross-examination. Facts were not hard to find. Damon had grown careless because he thought charm counted as a financial strategy. Vanessa subpoenaed his brokerage records and traced commission payments that should have flowed through marital accounts. He had redirected part of them into a separate business reserve and a personal investment account after I confronted him. She found hotel charges disguised as client expenses and credit card statements full of dinners, gifts, and weekend bookings. None of that was enough to give me the house, but it mattered. It showed concealment. It showed dissipation of marital funds. It showed that while I was paying for groceries, utilities, repairs, and ordinary household needs, he had been preserving liquidity for himself and his affair. This will not rewrite title history, Vanessa told me, tapping a legal pad with her pen. But it gives me leverage and it gives the judge a reason to stop viewing him as the reasonable husband in a tailored suit. Damon moved quickly once the papers were filed. Before the temporary orders were entered, he stripped out his furniture, his office equipment, the newer primary bedroom set, the dining table, half the kitchen inventory, and enough shared pieces to make the house feel violated. What he left behind were my clothes, my framed family photographs, my sample binders, my design books, the guest room chest, some seasonal decor in the attic, and the garage toolbox he had always despised. That was why the house looked gutted when I got there that Tuesday. He had taken the things he wanted before the law could tell him to stop, and left the rest for later collection. By the time we got before Judge Mercer, the practical damage was already done. Vanessa made sure it was documented anyway. Judges do not love petty cruelty when it is laid out in a clean timeline. The divorce took a little over 3 months, which is fast only if you have never lived through every day of one. Damon hired Calvin Greer, a loud attorney with a talent for sounding offended on behalf of guilty men. He tried to paint me as an inconsistent freelancer who had floated through a marriage funded by her husband's ambition. Vanessa answered with receipts, transfers, invoices, and utility bills. She showed my design income going into the joint account. She showed grocery charges, repair payments, insurance drafts, and school fundraising donations for Damon's niece that I had covered because his money was always tied up somewhere else. She also forced disclosure of the reserve account he had tried to minimize. In the end, the judge accepted Damon's separate property claim on the house and the brokerage lease sport utility vehicle, but he did not let Damon off untouched. I received the older sedan, a 6-figure equalization payment, and a contribution toward my legal fees because of the hidden commissions and misuse of marital funds. It still did not feel like justice. There is no spreadsheet that can fully account for humiliation. But Vanessa gave me what the law could actually deliver, and that mattered. During the final property review, she read the list line by line while Calvin Greer sounded bored. Clothing, design equipment, family photographs, grandmother's cedar chest, personal jewelry, books, studio files, and one antique red metal toolbox from the garage. Calvin laughed at that. "My client has no interest in the rust bucket," he said. Damon barely looked up. He signed away any claim to it without blinking. Vanessa glanced at me, and I saw the satisfaction in her face, though at the time I thought she was only pleased to catch them being dismissive on the record. I signed after him. My hand did not shake. When it was done, I was not triumphant. I was tired, and I was free. Rochelle met me at the house the day I went back for the last of my things. Damon was not there. There were new furniture catalogs on the kitchen counter and half-open boxes in the den, which told me Betrayal had already begun imagining herself in my old rooms. Rochelle and I packed in silence at first. My clothing, my files, my grandfather's photographs, the guest room chest, a lamp I had bought at a flea market years earlier and rewired myself. a crate of fabric swatches. The house felt stranger than it had the first night because now it did not even pretend to belong to me. In the garage, Rochelle and I lifted the toolbox together. It was heavier than it looked. She grunted and said, "Your grandfather had cinder blocks in here?" I almost smiled. "Just old tools," I told her. "He kept everything." I had no idea how literal that answer was. My apartment was on the third floor of a building in Baltimore that smelled like cleaning solution and old carpet. It had one bedroom, one narrow galley kitchen, and a shower that took several minutes to turn hot. It was what I could afford without touching the settlement until Vanessa and the financial advisor she recommended helped me plan. Rochelle helped me carry boxes up 6 flights total because the staircase doubled back twice. The toolbox nearly broke both of us on the second-floor landing. We dropped it in the corner of the living room and stood over it breathing hard. The apartment came unfurnished. I had a sleeping bag, a suitcase, a folding chair, and a pillow. Rochelle looked around with tears in her eyes and said, "This is temporary." I nodded because I needed it to be true, even though that first week every wall felt like proof of how completely my life had been cut apart. The silence in that apartment was different from the silence in my marriage. The silence with Damon had been crowded with unsaid things. This silence was plain, honest, and at first almost unbearable. I worked during the day, patching together freelance design jobs, then came home to eat takeout on the floor. I blocked Damon everywhere because Rochelle made me promise, but my mind still replayed the marriage like a detective film, scanning for the exact frame where love became contempt. One Thursday night, I came home after a client canceled on me for the second time and found myself staring at the toolbox as if it had been waiting. I knelt beside it and opened the stiff clasp the way my grandfather had taught me, pressing down and then lifting at an angle. The lid gave with a soft metal sigh. The top tray looked exactly as I remembered it. Small planes with worn wooden handles, chisels with brass caps, wrenches arranged by size, a green bubbled level, a folding ruler. They smelled faintly of oil and cedar, and when I picked up one of the planes, I remembered being 7 years old, struggling to push it across oak while my grandfather stood behind me with his hands over mine. "Let the tool do the work," he used to say. "Your job is to guide it, not bully it." I lifted the tray out and set it aside. Beneath it sat the deeper compartment with hammers, a hand drill, sockets, and a machinist's square. When I shifted one hammer to the side, the bottom gave under my fingertips. It moved only a fraction, but enough to stop my breath. I pressed again, more carefully this time, and felt the panel lift on the opposite edge. The false bottom came up with a small metallic scrape. Beneath it was a narrow hidden compartment running the length of the box. Inside were 3 leather pouches tied with twine, a small walnut case with brass hinges, and a folded letter yellowed with age. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. Henry Franklin's hand had always leaned slightly right, solid and patient. The letter was short. He told me that if I was reading it, he was gone and I needed what was there. He wrote that he had spent a lifetime collecting pieces worth preserving, that some had been bought, some traded for, some saved from being discarded by people too foolish to understand them. He warned me not to take them to a pawn shop or flea market. He told me to find someone who knew what they were looking at. He ended the note the way he had ended every birthday card I ever got from him. "I love you, baby girl." My hands shook when I opened the first pouch. It held a heavy gold pocket watch, engraved and immaculate. The second held old coins wrapped in soft paper sleeves. The third contained a Civil War-era surgical kit nested in worn leather, its instruments delicate and unsettlingly beautiful. In the walnut case were 4 hand-forged woodworking tools unlike any I had ever seen, their walnut handles worn smooth and each metal neck stamped with the same maker's mark, an A inside a diamond. I sat on that apartment floor with history spread around my knees and cried harder than I had cried on the day my marriage ended. Not because of money, because the one person who had loved me without agenda had reached across time and left me something hidden inside the thing the wrong man had mocked. Rochelle came over before her hospital shift the next morning and stood staring at my kitchen table for nearly a minute before she spoke. "This is not yard sale stuff," she finally said. Through her uncle, she got me the number for Roland Whitfield, an antiques and estate appraiser with a narrow shop on Mercer Avenue. Mr. Whitfield did not give me a dramatic number on the spot, and that made me trust him. He examined the items with gloved hands, then looked at me over his glasses and said, "Mrs. Carter, I can tell you 2 things immediately. First, your grandfather had a serious eye. Second, we need specialists. He sent the pocket watch to a horology expert in Philadelphia, the coins to a numismatics firm for grading, the surgical kit to a medical antiques scholar, and photographs of the 4 tools to a historian of black craftsmanship at Howard University. Do not tell anyone yet, he said. Not until we know exactly what we are holding. The next 5 weeks felt like standing in a doorway between 2 lives. Reports came in one at a time. The watch was an 1878 Waltham railroad-grade piece in remarkable condition. The coin collection included a high-value Liberty Head double eagle and several rare mint varieties. The surgical kit was authentic, documented to a Union field surgeon by inscription and period records. The 4 woodworking tools were the real revelation. They had been made in the 1850s by August Pemberton, a free craftsman in North Carolina whose surviving work was scarce enough to attract museum interest. The historian's letter did not sound like fiction. It sounded restrained, which was even more powerful. Roland Whitfield spread the valuation packet across his counter and told me the conservative aggregate range was between $3.8 and $4.4 million, subject to sale conditions. I sat down because my knees stopped being reliable. I called Rochelle first because joy is dangerous when it has nowhere to go. Then I called Vanessa. Her reaction was not squealing or disbelief. It was strategy. She asked when the hidden compartment had been discovered, who had handled the items, what dates were on the reports, and whether Damon knew anything. He did not. Vanessa met me the next morning with Laverne Cross, a financial advisor whose face revealed nothing and whose mind missed less. Vanessa confirmed what the decree already suggested. The toolbox had been awarded to me expressly as personal property. The contents were a premarital inheritance discovered after the divorce, and Damon had no viable claim. Still, she wanted a fortified paper trail. Laverne set up a trust, arranged secure storage and insurance, and told me not to change my visible life overnight. Sudden wealth does not protect people, she said. Structure does. I decided early that I would not liquidate everything at once. The Pemberton tools felt like legacy, not inventory. Roland agreed. We planned a staggered process. 1 coin sold privately through a vetted buyer to give me working capital. The watch and remaining coins routed to a major auction house after grading, the surgical kit sold through a specialty sale, and the tools retained pending a possible institutional loan. For the first time in months, I had choices that were not about damage control. I also had a dream that suddenly looked less like fantasy and more like a plan. I had been freelancing as an interior designer for 6 years, taking whatever residential jobs paid on time, staging homes for agents who rarely gave me full credit, reworking tired rooms into spaces that made people breathe easier. I wanted my own studio, not a vanity firm, a real one, so I built it carefully. I stayed in the apartment. I kept driving the older sedan. I kept taking client meetings in borrowed conference rooms and coffee shops while Laverne structured the trust and the first sale cleared. At night, I drafted business plans at my tiny kitchen table. I ran numbers until my eyes blurred. I assembled the strongest pieces of my portfolio, including a brownstone renovation in Baltimore and a waterfront condo project I had once completed for a difficult doctor who later became one of my best referrals. 3 months after the first private sale funded the launch account, I signed a lease on a modest storefront on Birch Street with tall windows, worn hardwood floors, and enough room for 2 drafting tables, a sample library, and hope. I named it Franklin Design Company because every meaningful thing in my life seemed to start with the person who taught me how to make things that lasted. The first 6 months were not glamorous. They were long. I painted walls, assembled shelving, negotiated with vendors, and worked freelance jobs during the day to keep my public income looking steady. Rochelle brought sandwiches and talked me out of at least 4 spirals. My first major independent commission was a restaurant redesign for Otis Whitaker, a man who had been running the same family restaurant for 20 years and had the wisdom to know he needed help seeing it fresh. That project led to a brownstone renovation. The brownstone led to 2 office consultations. The office consultations led to a referral from an architect named Micah Morrison, who had seen my residential portfolio and wanted to meet about a boutique hotel project near the harbor. He did not promise me the job. He asked thoughtful questions, studied my drawings like they mattered, and listened when I talked about how public spaces should make people feel held, not merely impressed. That was the beginning of the professional life I had been trying to reach for years. The hotel project did not drop from the sky and save me. It demanded everything. I hired Janine Pryor, a sharp young designer whose cover letter sounded like somebody already understood that beauty was a practical need. I hired Bryce Coleman to keep operations from collapsing under the weight of deadlines, samples, invoices, and scheduling chaos. We worked for months under fluorescent lights, with fabric books spread across every surface and takeout cartons stacked beside scale drawings. The hotel took nearly a year from first meeting to finished rooms. In that time, Franklin Design Company stopped being an idea and became a place clients entered with confidence. Only after the second auction closed, after the trust had clear documentation and the firm had a real revenue history, did I buy a small townhouse on Prospect Lane. Even then, the first thing I moved in was not furniture. It was my grandfather's toolbox. Mike had drifted into my life slowly enough that I trusted it. We spent so many hours discussing materials, sightlines, local art, and how to balance warmth with restraint that I learned the shape of his mind before I learned anything personal about him. When he finally mentioned, almost casually, that his own long relationship had ended the year before because he wanted a shared life and she wanted parallel ones, it did not feel like a confession. It felt like context. I told him I was divorced. He did not ask for details. That alone felt like respect. Over time I noticed the rest. He remembered what Janine liked in her coffee. He treated contractors, clients, and receptionists with the same calm attention. He never made performance out of tenderness. By the time he asked if I wanted dinner that was not about work, I had already decided he was safe in the way Damon never had been. Damon, meanwhile, became a ghost I mostly knew through attempts to force himself back into relevance. The first time he reached out was after a local business magazine ran a feature on the hotel and listed Franklin Design Company among the city's rising firms. He called and left a voicemail pretending it was merely congratulations. I deleted it. 3 days later he tried again. Then a text. Then another. The messages were careful at first, almost friendly, but underneath them I could hear panic. People who leave you with a lawyer's note do not suddenly develop curiosity about your well-being unless something in your life has begun to bother their story about themselves. Rochelle heard from a mutual acquaintance at his brokerage that commissions were down, his house payments were behind, and Brielle, now deprived of the thrill that secrecy once gave her, had become demanding in ways he had not budgeted for financially or emotionally. I did not go looking for any of that. It arrived anyway. 1 year after the divorce, Franklin Design Company won a regional interior design award for the hotel. Standing backstage before the ceremony, I thought about the first industry event Damon ever dragged me to, where I had spent the night in a fitted dress he never once noticed while he worked the room and forgot I was standing beside him. At this ceremony, I walked to the podium in a green silk dress and felt fully visible without needing anyone's permission. I thanked Janine and Bryce by name. I thanked the hotel team. Then I spoke about Henry Franklin. I told the room that my company carried his name because he had spent his life building useful, beautiful things without needing applause. I told them a rusty red toolbox had taught me that the world often misjudges value because it confuses polish with worth. When I said, "The things people overlook are sometimes the things that change your life," the room went still in the best possible way. That speech led to a call from Yvette Dawson, a feature writer at the city's main newspaper. She wanted the full story: my grandfather, the toolbox, the discovery, the company. I did not say yes immediately. Vanessa reviewed everything first. More than a year had passed since the decree. The trust was established. The sales were documented. The tools remained in secure storage with a museum inquiry already under review. "There is no legal opening here," Vanessa said. "If he rattles, let him." So I did the interview. Yvette wrote the piece with care. She did not flatten it into a miracle story. She wrote about history, inheritance, workmanship, and what it means to build a life after being underestimated. When the article ran, the headline named the toolbox and the discovery value plainly. By that afternoon, it was all over the city. By Monday, my inbox had turned into weather. Vanessa called the next morning, not because I was in danger, but because she wanted me informed. Damon had phoned Calvin Greer in a panic after reading the article, convinced the settlement could be reopened. Calvin, to his credit, told him exactly what Vanessa had told me a year earlier. The toolbox had been expressly awarded to me, the contents were inherited property, and ignorance was not fraud when neither party knew the value at the time. Damon then had the nerve to contact Vanessa's office himself. She returned the call personally and shut the door in one sentence at a time. He has no legal basis, no equitable claim, no procedural argument, and no path around the decree, she told me. I was polite because I am a professional. But if he tries again, I will be less generous. I thanked her and went back to work feeling lighter than I had expected. Finality has its own sweetness. The direct payoff came 2 days later. I was in the Birch Street studio reviewing finished samples with Janine when our receptionist buzzed my office and said a man named Damon Carter was downstairs insisting he only needed 5 minutes. For 1 second the old instinct flared, the one that wondered whether I should manage his feelings. Then it passed. I told her I would come down. He was standing in the lobby in one of the suits that used to impress people before I understood how empty expensive fabric could be. Behind him, my studio was alive. Bryce walking a client through schedules, Janine pinning elevations to the wall, sample boxes stacked like evidence of a real life. Damon looked past me and saw all of it. I watched him register the name on the glass, the employees, the confidence, the sheer fact of me. He started with, "You look good." Because men like him reach first for the script that once worked. I said, "What do you need, Damon?" He tried to soften his face into regret. He said he had been thinking a lot. He said things had gotten complicated. He said he wanted to talk about everything that happened and maybe clear the air. Then, because he could not help himself, he drifted toward the real reason. The article. The toolbox. The money. He did not say those words all at once, but I heard them underneath every sentence. I let him talk until he ran out. Then I told him the truth in a voice so calm it surprised even me. You only learned the value of that box after somebody else put a number on it. You did the same thing to me. That is why you lost both. He stared at me like he wanted to argue and could not find the part of the lie that still held. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer closure for his benefit. I told him Vanessa had already made the legal position clear. I told him he was not to come to my studio again. Then I held the door open the way you do for any visitor whose time is over. As he walked out, Micah came in carrying takeout coffees for the team. He greeted me with an easy smile and a morning, then glanced at Damon with polite indifference, the kind that hurt more than hostility because it meant Damon no longer ranked as a central event in my day. Damon looked from Micah to me to the studio behind us and understood something undeniable. I had not merely survived him. I had built beyond him. When the door closed, Bryce asked quietly if I needed a minute. I looked around my own company, at my own people, and said, "No, let us get back to work." 6 months later, after a full curatorial review, condition reporting, provenance confirmation, and loan agreement, the 4 August Pemberton tools went on display at a major museum collection dedicated to Black American history and material culture. I took my mother, Denise, to see them. She stood in front of the glass case with her hand over her mouth and tears gathering before she realized they were there. The placard named the maker, the decade, the place, and the Franklin family collection. My mother whispered, "Your grandfather always knew what mattered." The rest of the collection had already done what it needed to do. Between the auction house sales and the private transactions, the total came in just over $4.2 million. Part of it stayed invested through the trust. Part of it funded Franklin Design Company. Part of it established the Henry Franklin Scholarship, which now supported young craftspeople and trade students whose hands were still learning how to become sure. By then the company had 5 employees and a reputation I no longer had to apologize for. We had finished restaurants, offices, homes, and one community art space that remains one of my favorite jobs because of what it gave back to the neighborhood. Janine had grown into leadership beautifully. Bryce ran operations like a man conducting weather. Micah and I were taking our time, which turned out to be another word for doing something right. He never asked me to shrink my work to make room for love, and I never asked him to dim himself so I could feel secure. That may sound ordinary, but after a marriage built on extraction, ordinary respect felt radical. Some mornings he brought pastries to the studio. Some evenings we cooked in my townhouse kitchen and talked about buildings, poems, family, and the strange relief of not having to perform. Love, I learned, should not feel like an audit. A little over a year after the article ran, I stood on my balcony at sunrise with coffee warming both hands and looked out over the park across the street. The townhouse behind me was quiet in the best way. The toolbox sat on the living room shelf where morning light touched the old red metal and made the dents glow softly instead of disappear. I had cleaned it, preserved it, and left every scar intact. It deserved that honesty, and so did I. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter with 3 messages in a row. Rochelle asking about breakfast, Janine forwarding a new client inquiry, and Micah wishing me a day as good as I deserved. I smiled and set the mug down for a second just to look at the room, the life, the evidence. Damon had left me with a note and an empty house. What he did not understand then, and what he was forced to understand later, was that he had walked away from the wrong woman holding the wrong box. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.